Hi everyone, welcome to Last Few Spins. I listened to 119 different albums in the year 2024, and in this video I'm going to be going through what my 10 best albums of the year are. I take into consideration the lyrics, the instrumentation, the production, and the overall vibe of the album, and all of these things lead me to my conclusions. There are lots of different genres represented in this list, so I invite you to stick around and you might discover something new that you can look up after the video. Without further ado, number 10 on my list is Hello, I'm Britti by Britti. This album may have eventually slipped to the number 10 spot over time, but this debut by Britti actually stayed at the top of my list for the early months of the year. Within the silky bass lines, her charming vibrato vocals, and melodies that take their time to develop but always deliver, there really isn't any glaring flaws in this album. I found it to be quite honest and wholesome, qualities that fit her voice and vibe perfectly. I think the only reason why it couldn't stay at the top while the rest of the releases on this list trickled out boiled down to the fact that I really wasn't driven to keep going back to it much once I had my standard few listens in. As I revisited this album again last week, I didn't expect for it to make this list. However, I was reminded again of the natural and smooth flow of every track, and it was clear that it deserved a spot.
Silly boy, I have no choice but to walk away.
Moving on to number 9, we have Pearl Jam with Dark Matter. If you watched the last video I uploaded, you know I am a huge fan of Pearl Jam, so this may not come as much of a surprise to see this album make my list. Although I would not blindly put any Pearl Jam album within my top 10 just because it's them, I certainly feel like this spot is warranted in this case. While I did like their previous entry, Gigaton, which was released in 2020, Dark Matter flows much better than that one and has much more of a cohesive feel. This is likely because they as a band collaborated live in the studio on Dark Matter, which was a bit more of a collective effort than the previous album had been. This comes across on the track Wreckage, with it feeling as though each band member is reacting in real time to the other. Production-wise, this album sounds incredible with a powerful low end and the increasingly higher register of Eddie Vedder's voice setting well within the mix. Matt Cameron's drum work on this album is also some of his best in a while, which certainly drives these tracks forward in an album that seems to fly by. With plenty of reasons to make this list, in the number 8th spot is Crows with Reason Enough. Now, I had never heard of this band until a couple months ago, when one of my favorite vocalists, Ellie Rousel from Wolf Alice, shared something on her Instagram about Crows' new release. After doing a little research, Crows had opened for them during a leg of their 2022 North American tour, which was their connection. But digressing from that side note, I of course then checked this album out, and from the first listen, I dug almost everything about it. It skirts that line between the type of punk rock you would hear at a small smoky club, and the type of rock that you could also imagine being played to a large arena. Thankfully, it leans more towards the in-your-face, fast-paced riffs and melodies that force you to do a little headbanging. Just be careful not to hurt your neck during the track every day of every year. In the 7th spot on this list, I have one of the most risk-taking artists of our generation, St. Vincent with All Born Screaming. After channeling a 70s sound in her previous release, Daddy's Home, Annie Clark roars back to the future with All Born Screaming. All of the little St. Vincent isms are in full effect within this self-produced collection of what she does best. I feel this especially within the 7th track, The Power's Out. As it begins, it has the feeling like she's waking up in her bed with the apocalypse right outside her door. And as the song builds, it seems like we're taking a walk through the streets to survey the damage.
The man on my screen said just as somebody shot him.
Her instrumentation and quirkiness feels as confident as ever throughout the entire album, which perhaps can't be fully appreciated unless listening to the whole thing attentively. Most of these tracks, even like some of her best previous work, aren't the type of tracks that will hook a casual listener, but for those of us who allow ourselves to simmer in a piece of work before judging it is always rewarded when St. Vincent is the artist in question, and All Born Screaming is no different. Crashing into the 6th spot on this list like a bull in a china shop is Amyl and the Sniffers with Cartoon Darkness. Of all the albums I've listened to that were released in 2024, I feel that this entry by Amyl and the Sniffers is the best capture of a live feel. Every track on Cartoon Darkness feels like it's being played right in front of you, with Amy screaming in your face to make sure she gets her point across. The abrasiveness of this band is also its appeal, which is a fine line to walk, but with each release they have improved their ability to write catchy hooks within a punk rock aesthetic. The lyrics in Cartoon Darkness are not for the faint of heart for sure, but even as she's singing about jerking and squirting, it just works. That first track is an extreme example of some of those X-rated lyrics that might be a little too hot for this channel, but to be honest, there's no way for this band to thrive like that unless they are mixing in some of those wild and unpredictable themes. With their heavy guitar riffs and their relentless drumming, to its core, this album just rocks, and really no further explanation could do that aspect of it any more justice. Before we hit the top 5, I just want to mention that if you're enjoying this content and want to see more from me in the future, be sure to subscribe to this channel and give a like to this video, as this channel is still very new and every bit of support means a lot to me. Alright, on to number 5. Pillow Queens with Name Your Sorrow. This is a band that wears their heart on their sleeves within the performances of these tracks, both lyrically and musically. The blending of their thoughtful, subtle guitar parts fits perfectly with the feeling of loss that many of the tracks seem to represent. There's a consistent theme of someone slipping away from the vocalist, but she really doesn't know what to do to get that person back. So she is just trying to move forward the best she can. Eventually there is a sense of redemption as the album reaches emotional highs that are just as steep as the lows. I'm really glad that I discovered this album, but it was quite a late addition as I just learned about it about 2 weeks before now. Sometimes the recency bias can come into play, but I made sure to really sit with this album to get a clear understanding of it, while also revisiting many of the other great albums on this list. With each listen, it seemed to gain strength, and I fell in love with many of these songs, including Like a Lesson and Notes on Worth. After enjoying this album as much as I did, I'm checking out the rest of their work, as I'm sure there are plenty other gems to discover. Now for the part of this list. For my 4th best album of 2024, we have Halsey, the Great Impersonator. Now before I get too deep into this, I want to acknowledge that this album will probably not make many other best of lists for 2024. I'm aware there seems to be some sort of stigma towards Halsey's artistic ability, but there was just something about the backstory and theme of this album that stands out far above her other albums, where I believe with this release, we saw someone deliver their greatest achievement to date. Within The Great Impersonator, we see Halsey embrace her own mortality within the lyrical content covering her illnesses over the past few years. And instead of being cloaked under some of her typical pop formula, she uses artists that she was influenced by to draw inspiration for each track. A detailed rollout of each impersonation was promoted on her social media pages, which without some good music to back it up would seem like a cheap gimmick. However, this album is full of meaningful melodies and narratives that's certainly worth giving an honest shot. One of the few videos I have made on my channel at this point is a deep dive about this album that I was inspired to make a couple weeks ago, and I would love for you to check that video out after this one if you'd like more of my thoughts about Halsey's The Great Impersonator. At this point, we're starting to get into the nitty-gritty of this list, which is the perfect segue for the following band. At number 3 is TANGK by Idols. As I listen to any Idols album, I find myself getting energized with every passing second that I hear. As a live act, it's on a whole other level, but even with their studio work lies a passion for living life to the fullest with the way they play. TANGK is no different, as it channels a breath of fresh air within rock and roll to show us that bands that play heavier music can be vulnerable enough to get you to stop and listen to what they're saying. In a self-proclaimed way, vocalist Joe Talbot bridges that gap within the song Pop Pop Pop. This album is full of build-ups, hooks, and some of the boldest drumming you'll hear on any record today. It ends up being a record of empathy and experimentation that totally works as the perfect piece of music to let you be free from the world for a moment and dip into some meaningful art. In the runner-up position, we have an album that I've been obsessed with this year, and that is Morgan Wade, Obsessed. While I grew up on country music in a flyover state, as an adult I've gone farther away from enjoying that type of music as I myself have drifted away from that culture. However, there are a handful of country music artists that still have me in the palm of their hands, and one of them would be Morgan Wade. In a genre that's now characterized with bland lyrics and predictable vibes, Morgan Wade breaks the mold once again with her third LP. I've loved every record of hers to date, with 2020's Reckless also being towards the top of that year's list as well. But with Obsessed, we find a songwriter that's really in the zone and not afraid to wear her heart on her sleeve. When she says, "I don't want to face reality, stay with me," we hear someone that's had a personal memory that feels intimate, especially as she delivers her emotion with every lyric. Most of the songs are simple in structure, but complex in feelings. There's no shortage of heart in this release, which had me so close to giving this the top spot, but the following album just had an it factor that I couldn't resist. After listening to 119 albums, this one captured me the most. I'm talking about Fontaines DC with Romance. From start to finish, this album brings Brian Chatton's poetry to life, as it never stops driving forward and never stops introducing us to new soundscapes and song types. As we kick off the album with the eerie title track, Romance, we then walk through a door to Starburster, a drum-driven track that feels like it's from another world. Fast forward to the fifth track, titled In the Modern World, one of the best songs of 2024, with its ebbs and flows as the vocalist comes to terms with a disconnection from his surroundings. This Romance album is full of thunderous occasions for the low end of the mix to shine, and it provides the perfect foundation for us to appreciate what this band is delivering right now. Fontaines DC now both feels and even looks like the type of band to take chances and be vulnerable, which is also a theme I love about the Idols albums. While every release on my list will now have a place in my heart, there's just something extra about this Fontaines DC album this summer that hit harder. I have tickets to see them in Columbus, Ohio next year, and I'm already pumped to hear these tracks live and up close. So I just wanted to thank you for tuning in to my Best Albums of 2024 video. I thought this would be a good opportunity to invite you to actually check out my album that I released this year, called Blues from Planet Mars by Last Few Spins. So when I start working in my studio here on a new track, I take something from every type of music that you saw on this list and combine it together. And what comes out of me is typically kind of like a chill, vibier type of rock. So I would certainly love if you check that out. It's on Apple Music, Spotify, and any other type of streaming platform. I'm really looking forward to what 2025 has to offer in terms of new releases. There are already a few announced that I'm pretty excited about. With that being said, I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.